Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we'll be looking at the best healers for patch 8.1. This is going to be a purely speculation video. We're going to be discussing each and every healer in terms of the changes that are getting in the new patch. We'll be looking at the new Azerite gear that's being added and how that might impact their healing in 5-man content and raid content. Keep in mind, things can and will change before the patch is released, so this list might alternate a little bit, but I'll try and keep people updated by adding comments with the new healer changes that happen after this video is made. Again, this is a speculation video based on the changes that are currently available. We'll be looking at healers that received not a lot of changes. We'll be looking at healers that received a lot of changes, but that is mainly to do with their toolkit rebalancing. We'll be looking at healers that received pretty major nerfs and healers that received well-deserved buffs. So let's start by looking at healers that received not a lot of changes coming into the new patch. That includes Holy Paladin and Mistweaver Monk. Now, Holy Paladin, besides the awesome animation changes that are happening in 8.1 with a lot of their abilities, which looks really nice, their talents or spells have not really gone any alterations. So we have to look at some of the Azerite traits that have been introduced, and some of the more interesting Azerite trait changes have to do with Glimmer of Light, which reportedly works with beacon transfer. Maybe that will lead to a lot of overhealing. Whether it's going to be really strong or not depend on the numbers and whether they're going to stay, but this is one of the more interesting Azerite traits that is being added to healers, and also the changes made to Divine Revelations look quite nice as well. But again, besides this, there isn't anything added, and a lot of people are complaining about the lack of changes, because if you played Holy Paladin from Legion or coming in from Legion into BfA, you'll know that the major concern of players who play Holy Paladin is that Paladin gameplay has become a little more bland or a little more boring, because a lot of the cool and interactive abilities of spells have been reworked or just outright removed. I feel Blizzard has missed the boat by not adding Marad's Dying Breath as a talent choice instead of the Awakening talent that's been added in BfA, but I'm still waiting for some of those changes. But again, with the new patch and with the new raid release, item levels are going to be increasing, secondary stats are going to be larger, so overall Holy Paladins scale well with critical strike, which means more infusion of light procs. So I feel Holy Paladins were one of the best, tank healers in all there, or at least 2 target healers due to the Beacon of Fate, and that kind of niche is going to persist in the new raid as well. And I feel Paladins were great Mythic plus key pushers as well, with a lot of Holy Paladins pushing really high keys. So I feel that's still going to persist, and Holy Paladins are still going to be in a good position, but the lack of gameplay changes is somewhat disappointing in my opinion. And we can also look at Mistweaver Monks, and Mistweaver Monks coming from Legion into BfA were probably the underdogs that became one of the MVP healers, because Mistweavers are in a really good position in 5-mans and in raid scenarios, being included in world first kills, being included in one of the highest keys done to date right now, and regarded as one of the best single target healers in the game right now. And Blizzard is kind of tackling that by including the nerf to Enveloping Mist. Now, Enveloping Mist healing has been reduced a little bit, but for Mistweavers who are playing the game, they know that the single target healing, or the thing that makes Mistweaver single target healing overpowered, is the Enveloping Mist bonus effect, which increases your healing on that target by a certain percentage, which is also increased if you pick certain talents as well. And that bonus healing is not being touched, only the healing of Enveloping Mist is being reduced a little bit, so that's not going to impact 5-man or raid healing that much. And I still feel Mistweavers are going to be in a really good position coming into the new patch. The thing that I feel Blizzard has missed out on again is the tier 100 talent balance, and that is Rising Mist. I feel Rising Mist should have gotten a bit of a buff to compete with Upwelling in raid situations and to compete with Focused Thunder in 5-mans, because Rising Mist creates this new fist weaving playstyle, which was extremely fun when I was testing that in BfA beta, but it was nerfed over the time, and all of a sudden Rising Mist was never really viable in 5-mans or raids. And this whole new playstyle with Rising Sunkick resets, which extends the duration of your HOTS and things like that, was never really experienced by majority of Mistweavers because it was never really viable. So I was kind of hoping for a little bit of a buffs in order for that talent or Rising Mist to actually compete, and I feel Blizzard could have really done that with 8.1. But if things stay the same as they are, Mistweavers are looking like a solid 5-man healer, a solid raid healer coming into the new patch, and a really good choice as a healer for anyone who's coming into, you know, BfA or playing BfA when the new patch is released. Now let's look at a healer that's receiving a lot of changes with patch 8.1, but the overall summary of the changes cannot be viewed as nerfs or buffs, more of a toolkit rebalancing, and that is Holy Priest. Now Holy Priest has been an extremely strong raid healer in Mythic Uldir. For the first time ever, Holy Priest were included in some of the Mythic world first skills in terms of 5-man balance, because Priest class has 2 healing specs. Holy has been heavily overshadowed by Discipline, because Discipline has been extremely strong spec in 5-mans because they can do a ton of damage while healing at the same time. And there has been a lot of changes happening to Holy. First of all, we can look at the overall healing buff to Holy Priests. All of their healing spells now going to heal for more, but to counteract that, a lot of the talents have been nerfed. For example, Benediction has been nerfed, Binding Heal has been nerfed in terms of the healing that it does, and the mana cost has been increased heavily. Holy World Salvation, which is an extremely strong raid cooldown, but the Holy World Salvation healing has been nerfed a lot as well. So overall, there are 3 talents that have been very, very popular for majority of Holy Priests in Mythic Uldir, and that is including Benediction, Binding Heal, and Holy World Salvation. All are kind of being nerfed and kind of opening up spots in those tiers, in those talent tiers, for other talents to come in. So that kind of makes sense, because those talents that I mentioned were extremely popular. They were, like, for example, Binding Heal has been an incredibly efficient heal for a lot of the BfA. So it kind of makes sense with the changes that are happening here. Besides that, Heal is going to heal for more. Renew is becoming a little bit stronger and might make it a bit more of a comeback. But if we look at the overall changes, there's a lot of talent changes, there's a lot of talent nerfs, but at the same time, the overall healing of Holy Priest has been increased. Now, where do I see Holy Priest in terms of raiding? I still feel Holy Priests are going to be very strong raid healers, possibly with different talent choices. In terms of 5-man, the 5-man viability is highly going to be dependent on how Discipline Priest changes are going to affect them in 5-man content. So priests who are looking to push high Mythic Plus, they'll decide on whichever spec is strong at the moment, and only time is really going to tell, because it's extremely hard to predict the 5-man viability for Holy and Discipline Priest for this time. So let's look at the healer that its current state is receiving a somewhat nerf in terms of raid performance, but not that big of an adjustment in 5-man content, and that is Restoration Druid. Now Resto Druid changes are mainly to do with Tranquility nerf. Tranquility healing and the Tranquility hot that's being applied has been reduced significantly, or at least the hot portion has been reduced significantly. But this change is quite major, because Resto Druids are one of the healers, or the only healer in the game that relies so heavily on its cooldown, which is Tranquility, and their talent build is based on this single cooldown. You'll be speccing Inner Peace to reduce the Tranquility cooldown. You'll be playing around your Trank and sometimes combine it with Flourish as well. So this change is looking to be quite significant in terms of the talent choices that might be, you know, becoming viable for Resto Druids in raiding scenarios. Maybe you won't be focusing around Tranquility that much. Maybe Flourish is not going to be as strong because the Trank hot is being nerfed quite a lot. Now, to offset that, which makes sense because Blizzard wants Druids to have more continuous healing rather than being so focused on that single cooldown, they're kind of buffing Wild Growth. But at this time, that buff to Wild Growth doesn't seem to be big enough to offset the Tranquility nerf. So overall, it's looking like Resto Druids are going to get somewhat of a nerf in raiding scenarios, and who knows the type of talent build that's going to emerge to kind of correlate with these changes. Now, if you look at some of the Azerite traits, there are some cool Azerite traits. For example, Early Harvest is looking quite interesting, and it could be a good choice depending on numbers and things like that. If you look at things like the Autumn Leaf redesign, which again adds the duration to rejuvenation, is interesting as well, because the previous version of Autumn Leaves was extremely hard to itemize or to build sets around for 5-mans and raids, because Autumn Leaves was pretty good for raids, but Autumn Leaves was really terrible for 5-man dungeons. So now this increase in rejuvenation is looking interesting, but at this time, this increase in rejuvenation's duration does not stack. You probably won't be getting more than 1 Autumn Leaves if it stays like it is. But if you talk about the overall changes for Resto Druids, there is a nerf for raiding Resto Druid because Tranquility is not going to heal that much. Wild Growth buff does not seem to be substantial enough. In 5-man situations, Tranquility does not play as big of a role, so it's not that big, and especially the fact that Wild Growth is being buffed, it's not going to impact, or the overall change is not going to be that impactful in 5-man situations. But overall, this is looking like a worrying time for Resto Druid who's looking to progress Mythic raiding content. Now let's look at a healer that's getting a well-deserved buff with patch 8.1, and that is Restoration Shaman. Resto Shaman has gone through quite a roller coaster of a ride in terms of the BfA performance and viability in raiding scenarios. With BfA Mythic being released, they were buffed. Slowly after that, they were buffed as well, and now with 8.1 they're getting buffed again, because it kind of highlights how underwhelming Resto Shamans were with the initial release of BfA. So with the changes happening in 8.1, which are pretty major in terms of the chain heal buff that they're getting, chain heal overall is getting its power increased regardless of which talent you're going to be using. So chain heal is becoming more powerful, and the stacked healing that you get from it is going to be more beneficial. Keep in mind that chain heal does have a 15-yard bounce radius. Of course, you can heal a person within 40 yards, but the bounce radius itself is only 15 yards. But in stack scenarios, chain heal is going to be stronger. In raid scenarios, it's quite easy to get chain heal bounces depending on how stacked encounters are. In 5-man situations, it can be a little bit harder, but it is a welcome change. And also on top of that, the high tide talent is being completely redesigned now. After spending 40,000 mana, you'll get a buff which lasts for 25 seconds, which increases the healing of your next 2 chain heals by 20%. Now, this is, it's going to require like a week or something to track. It increases your chain heal potency even more. It's going to be very interesting to test it out. It's going to be interesting to see how this is going to stack up with other talents like Cloudburst Totem and Ascendance, because those talents heavily rely on having a higher throughput. The more throughput a Shaman has, Ascendance will duplicate the healing, Cloudburst will store your healing, and they become stronger. So overall, the chain heal buff will possibly lead to more healing, which can be duplicated by Ascendance or stored up by Cloudburst Totems. So it's very interesting to be a Resto Shaman right now. Maybe some of the talent choices are going to change. Maybe Cloudburst is going to come back. Maybe there's going to be more interaction with chain heal. In terms of 5-mans, it's very hard to say because the community perception of Shamans being bad healers in 5-mans is still there. But these changes are going to help with that, especially if you can get that chain heal, the maximum bounces as well. So again, if you're a Resto Shaman, you're probably happy with these changes and you can't wait to play in 8.1. The Azerite trades are somewhat underwhelming in the type of gameplay they're going to be providing. I mean, there's an Ankh Azerite trade that's being introduced, which is very boring in my opinion. There's Turn of the Tide, which again replaces an existing Azerite trade. It seems quite strong, but it doesn't seem to affect your playstyle that much. In terms of the Azerite traits affecting your gameplay, there is not much in terms of the changes happening in 8.1. Now let's look at a healer that's going to be receiving the most nerfs coming into patch 8.1, and that is Discipline Priest. And it kind of makes sense, because if you're a good Discipline Priest with good knowledge of damage patterns in Mythic all day, you can provide ridiculous healing numbers. And in 5-mans, Discipline Priests are really strong because they can do a lot of damage while at the same time healing the party members. Now, to some extent, a lot of people will say that Discipline Priest single target is somewhat lacking, but now we're going to look at some of the changes that are happening in 8.1, and there is a lot of nerfs. The damage modifier, the damage of Smite, Shadow World Pain is being nerfed. Atonement Transfer is being nerfed as well. Power Word Shield, the mana cost is being increased, which means applying atonements with Power Word Shield is going to incur a bigger mana cost. We also can look at some of the talents like Power Word Solace being nerfed, talents like Schism being nerfed as well. So there's a lot of changes on top of the fact that they're also adding Weakened Soul, where a lot of people ask me about this, but Weakened Soul change is kind of irrelevant because it doesn't affect Rapture and it doesn't really affect PvE content at all, but all the other changes do. But it's not all doom and gloom. A lot of people will tell you this is a nerf somewhere around 5 to 10% in terms of the throughput that these priests are going to provide in raids and 5-mans. But we have to also look at some of the Azerite traits, which could both Discipline Priest weak points, Azerite traits like Depth of Shadows, which have been somewhat reworked. So each time Purge the Wicked or Shadow War Pain deals damage, the healing of your next Shadow Mend is doubled from the previous version, and atonements applied by Shadow Mend last an additional 3 seconds. And this is somewhat a significant change, because all of a sudden, in order for you to apply atonements at Discipline Priest, Power Word Shield was one of the main ways of doing that before 8.1, and the mana cost is being increased. So all of a sudden with this Azerite trait, you probably will be using Shadow Mend to actually apply atonements on people who actually need healing, while using Power Word Shield to apply atonements to people who don't really need healing, and you're trying to stack up your atonements before the big burst. So there are significant gameplay changes that are happening because of this change. Of course, anything can and will change, so this is kind of like, you know, a speculation preview. But like I mentioned, there are significant nerfs happening to Discipline Priest, but some of the Azerite traits are kind of trying to improve the gameplay for a lot of the Disc Priests out there, and trying to fill some of the weaknesses. In terms of the raid performance for Discipline Priest, I don't see Discipline Priest falling from the top spot. There's still going to be amazing raid healers, because in BfA they were at the top by quite a large margin. In 5-mans, we'll have to see how these Azerite traits are going to work. There's quite a few other Azerite traits that could affect the gameplay as well. Things like Sudden Revelation as well, which looks a little bit interesting in terms of how you're going to be using your Powered Radiance and then going into Holy Nova. So there's a lot of nerfs, but at the same time there's some quality of life improvements, and it's going to be very interesting to see Discipline Priest performing in raids and 5-man scenarios. Like I mentioned, if you really know the damage patterns of a fight, you will still perform well in raids. In my opinion, Discipline Priest is still going to be strong in raids. In 5-mans, it's going to be interesting to see, because you also have to look at things like, you know, Blood Decay nerfs and how that's going to affect like really high key pushing for Discipline Priest. But again, there's quite a few Azerite traits that are looking interesting. To summarize the video and to actually apply rankings for each of the healing specs in 5-mans and raid situations, I have to warn you about ranking videos and prediction videos in general, because the whole point of this video was to highlight the changes to each of the healers happening in 8.1 and to help you make your own decisions based on which healer is going to look strong. So I'm going to provide my own opinions, but you can challenge my opinions. You can leave comments below and tell me maybe I didn't consider something. So keep that in mind, guys, and especially with changes happening, or at least if possible changes are going to happen in the future, this will alter the ranking. So this is a big disclaimer. But if you look at the raid performance for 8.1, if you look at the raid performance at the start of BfA, you'll notice that at the start, Disc and Holy or Priest in generals were quite strong. Disc was extremely strong at the hands of an experienced Discipline Priest, and Resto Shamans were severely underwhelming at the start of BfA, and they received multiple buffs to offset that. And with 8.1, they're getting even more buffs. So the balance, or the raid balance in 8.1, I still see Priest being as one of the top raid healers in 8.1. Discipline is getting 5 to 10% nerf, which is not looking to be big enough to offset their incredible healing that they were doing at the start of BfA. They were the best healer by quite a large margin, and that nerf that they're receiving in 8.1 is not looking to be big enough, at least in my opinion. And Holy is not really getting nerfs or buffs, they're getting toolkit rebalance, so they're still going to be quite strong as well. So priests are looking really strong, and then you have this kind of middle of the pack healer group, which majority of healers stay in. So that includes things like Mistweaver monks, holy paladins, and at this time I would include restoration shamans here. And you could almost even rank Resto Shamans as even being higher on stacked fights, because everyone knows the niche of Resto Shamans is stacked healing. So all of a sudden Resto Shamans are looking a lot better in raid situations, and the healer that's kind of looking to lose out is a Restoration Druid, because Restoration Druid at the start of BfA or in old there was, you know, mid-pack healer that was surrounded by Mistweavers, paladins and things like that. So the Tranquility nerf that they're receiving and the Wild Growth buff that they're getting, the Wild Growth buff is not big enough, so Resto Druids are looking to kind of fall from this pack, in my opinion, unless there's going to be more changes happening. And I fully expect more changes to happen to Resto Druids, because I feel this nerf to Tranquility is a little bit too big, and it's probably going to shift them a little bit lower. If you look at 5-man balance, it's a lot harder to actually predict, so there is a lot of open discussion here, so please let me know if I miss out on something. But it's not unfair for me to say that Mistweaver monks, Resto Druids and paladins are still going to be in a good position when it comes to 5-man dungeons, because at the start of BfA there were 4 specs that were extremely strong and there were 2 specs that were kind of viewed as unwanted. So monks, Resto Druids, Holy Paladins are not really receiving that many changes now. I did talk about Resto Druid Tranquility nerf, which is most likely not going to be that big in 5-mans, plus on top of the fact that they're getting a wild growth buff, so this change is going to be more positive in 5-mans than it is in raids. So they're looking pretty strong. This was very strong at the start of BfA. They're getting quite a few nerfs, but you also have to consider they're getting a few Azerite traits that might fill the gaps where this was kind of feeling a little weak, and that is single target healing. But you also have to look at blood decay nerfs. And why do I have to look at tank nerfs? Because Discipline Priests relied heavily on having a blood decay in high Mythic plus keys to heal themselves, while Disc was doing other things because their single target wasn't the best out there. So it's relatively hard to predict. I still see Discipline Priests being within this pack, maybe not as good as they were before, but still a very competitive healer. Now we have to look at Restoration Shamans, and do I see Shamans as a climber spec in 8.1 in terms of Mythic plus? Now they're getting Chain Heal changes or Chain Heal massive buffs, and it makes Chain Heal a more attractive AoE heal. The fact is that in 5-mans it still requires being stacked. Chain Heal has a 15-yard bounce radius, while a lot of other healers, a lot of the other healer AoE abilities are much less restrictive. So in terms of the buffs that they're receiving, Resto Shamans still rely on that stacked component. They still rely on other people in the group. So inherently I feel Shamans maybe could have seen other changes, maybe some of the Azerite changes will help them out, but I still see that the community perception of Resto Shamans in 5-mans is going to be somewhat the same. But I would really love to see Resto Shamans breaking into the top healer spot in 5-mans, but I still think it's going to be relatively hard. And when we talk about Holy Priest, to some extent, Holy Priest performance in 5-mans or viability in 5-mans is heavily reliant on Discipline Priest power in 5-mans, and I still see Discipline Priest as a good healer in 5-mans. Holy is getting a lot of toolkit rebalancing, but I still don't see it being as better than Disc because of mainly the damage components and things like that. But I could be wrong, because this is extremely hard. This is the prediction that I was not sure. I definitely see Holy Priest being a preferred option on certain affixes where Disc might not be that great. At the end of the day, in my opinion, the balance still seems relatively the same, but I do hope Resto Shamans are gonna break into that, you know, better healer spot in 5-mans, and community perception is going to be higher, because I'm kind of sick of seeing Resto Shamans of being constantly declined in even lower Mythic plus keys. And we'll definitely have to see how the balance between Disc and Holy is going to play out. So thank you guys for watching this video. I know these prediction videos can be somewhat uncertain. Like I mentioned before, there's a lot of disclaimers in this video, so that's why I wanted people to actually see the general changes happening to every healer and make up their own minds, and then I also provide my own opinions. They can be wrong. I'd love to hear your opinions about this. Leave a comment below, and if you enjoyed the content, please do subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Thank you guys, and I'll see you in my next video.